Uh, correct me if I'm wrong, 93, but it seems like they cherry pick what they want to present. See, we're perfectly fine with all of the available evidence. We can reconcile it neatly. But what are they going to do with all of this information? Are they just going to dismiss it and pretend as if the information isn't valid, as if the sources aren't credible? Because these are the same books they like to make appeals to, correct?
Absolutely. I'm curious to see what they're gonna do. I'm actually a little curious. You know what I'm saying?
Probably strawman us, but I hope it doesn't end up being that way. So
Yeah.
look at this. Now this is from the book Israel on the
Appomattox.
Appomattox, pardon me, a Southern experiment in Black freedom from the 1790s through the Civil War by Melvin Patrick Ely, page 7. Citizen Richard Randolph, as he called himself in the style of the French revolutionaries, had unwillingly inherited Sam White and scores of other slaves from his father. When Randolph died at 26 in the year 1796, he left a will written in his own hand that assumed the form of a ringing abolitionist manifesto. Now, the reason why I'm reading this is because this is dealing with the people of Israel Hill. Now, a lot of y'all know that they made a plaque in 2009. You know, these guys act like that plaque was like from way back then. It was a plaque from that was made in 2009 commemorating the community, right? It was a community of free blacks that lived in that particular area, and they were given land by by Richard Randolph's widow after Richard Randolph died because he wanted the slaves to basically have land. I guess it was like conviction because he was a cousin of Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson thought the slaves should be freed, even though he never actually freed his slaves. So he didn't want to be, I guess, in some sense, like his cousin, and so he wanted to free the slaves that he owned or that he had come into possession of. But unfortunately, this only happened after he died. So, anywho, uh, uh, yeah, here we go. 26 in the year 1796, he left a will written in his own hand that assumed the form of a ringing abolitionist manifesto. Rudolph took special care to humbly beg, his slaves forgiveness for his part in the infamous practice of usurping the rights of our fellow creatures, equally in, entitled with ourselves to the enjoyment of liberty and happiness. And he called for Sam White and others to go free. Richard Randolph was not the only Virginian emancipator of his era. George Washington left a will at about the same time, providing that his slaves be liberated at his widow's death. Contemplating the inhumanity of slavery, Rudolph's cousin Thomas Jefferson once wrote, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just. Scores of white Virginians set slaves free during the years that followed the Revolution. But Jefferson and most others who admitted slavery was morally indefensible never pressed for a sweeping emancipation, for they had no idea what would become of liberated African Americans. Jefferson suspected that Africans were intellectually and physically inferior to Europeans. Once emancipated, he believed they would have difficulty surviving among whites. Even worse, Jefferson feared generation of grievances between master and bondman would lead to race war if slavery ceased to exist as a system of social control. Many whites believed that blacks who did become free should be removed from Virginia. Sam White's master, Richard Randolph, had offered a radical answer in Jefferson's moral dilemma. He denied that any dilemma existed. Randolph was not content to restore his slaves to their God given freedom. He also called for them to receive 400 acres of his land on which to build new lives as independent men and women. When Randolph's family carried out his will in 1810, after years of delay, his ex-slaves gave the name Israel Hill to their new home in the rolling terrain of Prince Edward County, and they called themselves quote unquote Israelites. In other words, because they named it Israel Hill, they were going to call themselves Israelites as a derivative of where they were living. And why? It was kind of a play off of the Bible, not because they believed they descended from the people, but as you're about to read, this was their promised land. So Israel Hill was their promised land.
It's kind of like how Was it the Ashkenaz took their name from where they were living?
Right, exactly. So Israel Hill that's why they received that name Israelite. Notice that Israelite is in quotation marks. So this means that it wasn't that they considered themselves physical descendants of Jacob. And if you guys, any one of you, get this book, if you purchase this book, they're not identifying themselves as physical descendants of Jacob. It's because they live in Israel Hill that they're quote unquote Israelites, because they believed Israel Hill was their promised land, sort of like how when the Israelites left bondage and they went into the land of promise, the land of milk and honey, they thought Israel Hill was their land of milk and honey. Not because they actually thought they were the biblical Israelites and Israel Hill was a fulfillment of prophecy or some, you know, weird stuff that like the Hebrew Israelites like to argue for, but rather it was because of the analogous nature of how the actual Israelites had been in bondage and then left to go to their promised land. So to these people, despite not actually, as far as we know, as far as we personally know, you know, who knows for sure, but as far as we personally know, aren't descendants of those people, and yet they felt compelled by the biblical narrative to call the place Israel Hill because they were being freed, and therefore because they were members of Israel Hill, they were quote unquote Israelites of Israel Hill, not Israelites of the Bible. Anyways, I thought I would point that out because that was a really bad argument by Dante, and I've seen a lot of Hebrew Israelites who will misuse that argumentation. You know, the whole idea of you know, Israel Hill is somehow. By the way, do the Hebrew Israelites ever notice, the ones that make that bad argument, that Israel Hill on the plaque is actually in quotation marks as well? Let me actually pull that up so everyone can see. And by the way, if you read on page 8, they wanted to create a mixed community with the white residents. Doesn't really sound a lot like a lot of these, well, at least the racist Hebrew Israelites. But all right, here we go. Yeah. So this is the image of Israel Hill that I'm about to show. And it should make some of these guys think, man. Like some of this argumentation is really weak, man. Really weak argumentation. All right. Free blacks of Israel Hill, right? Notice that when you look at the plaque that was erected in 2009, right here, these quote unquote Israelites and other free African Americans worked as farmers, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So this isn't saying that they were thinking they were the biblical Israelites. And you'll have a lot of unfortunately, you'll have a lot of uninformed Hebrew Israelites that don't know the history of why Israel Hill and why they were quote unquote Israelites.
And they
And they'll just
joined with white citizens.
white citizens, right? Right. And the town's First Baptist Church, right? It says in Farmville and joined with the whites and joined with white citizens to found the town's First Baptist Church in 1836. Utterly ridiculous, man.